Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, both Michael Gove and Jeremy Corbyn agree it's a crisis. The scale and speed of climate change has been thrown into focus by Extinction Rebellion and their protests in the centre of London. Tonight, MPs have been voting on whether to declare a climate emergency. A motion tabled by the Labour Party called on the government to take urgent steps to restore the UK's natural environment. In Wales, Assembly members are also being asked to vote there on a similar motion. So let's go live now to our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, who's in Westminster. Alex.
Well, crowd behind me on Parliament Square. Seconds ago, a massive cheer. They've got the news that the British Parliament is one of the first major legislators globally to declare a climate emergency. It's not just a rhetorical flourish. It is hoped that once this is done within this place, it'll make it much easier to radicalise moves towards a zero-carbon economy. These people would be of the view that trying to do that at present, which is envisaged by 2050, is not nearly ambitious enough. It sends a big message worldwide, also, of course, to the Chinese, the Indians, and regardless of what the White House might be thinking, the US states as well. Quite a day inside Parliament.
For climate change protesters gathering outside Parliament tonight, the move to declare a climate emergency inside Parliament would mean one of the key demands of the Extinction Rebellion movement would be met, and all that in just 2 weeks flat. In the Commons, proposing Labour's motion declaring a climate emergency and setting out a Green response to it, the Labour leader said people are protesting and now they're being heard.
Today, Mr. Speaker, this House must declare an environment and climate emergency. We have no time to waste. We are living in a climate crisis that will spiral dangerously out of control unless we take rapid and dramatic action now.
The Prime Minister wasn't there, leaving it to Environment Secretary Michael Gove to establish how the government intends preventing catastrophe.
I also want to make it clear that on this side of the House we recognise that the situation we face is an emergency. It is a crisis. It is a threat that all of us have to unite to meet.
Hours of debate, long on aspiration, short on action. No mention from government or opposition of the major current subsidised expansion of North Sea oil and gas. Nothing too on taxing aviation kerosene like petrol has been for years. They all talk about how we need to fly less. Few seem to have a clue how to achieve it. And, irony of ironies, this debate on the day lawyers removed an obstacle to expanding London's Heathrow Airport, already a major carbon contributor.
Greta Thunberg last week was talking about the emergency and saying that we needed to see action as a result. Will he demonstrate his newfound conversion to this emergency by agreeing that the expansion of Heathrow Airport is quite simply incompatible with our climate change commitments? If it goes ahead, by 2050, aviation, if it's given a blank cheque, could be using up 2/5 of our total carbon budgets.
But Mr. Gove declined to answer that question. Without the recent 11 days of Extinction Rebellion protest across London, today's debate would scarcely have happened. Their demand for politics to declare a climate emergency worked. The SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon did it, so too Labour's Jeremy Corbyn. The influence of figures as diverse as Sir David Attenborough's climate change documentary, the intervention of the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and the visit to London from Sweden by train from the student climate change strike leader Greta Thunberg. All of which has changed to some extent the political traffic lights to green.
We have to have regard to the warning issued by the Governor of the Bank of England when he said that climate uncertainty was an economic risk, where he said that climate challenges could become challenges in the financial markets.
Things have moved. This was Parliament back in February when it last debated climate change. Not a single party leader turned up, nor did many MPs. And the Commons hadn't debated the issue at all for 2 years prior to this dismal showing. 2 months on, better attendance, commendable cross-party support, and 84 members applied to speak. But, as MPs kept saying today, this chamber is still being led by events, opinions, protest and indeed science, instead of doing its job, leading them.
Well, in Wales, politicians have also been voting on what action to take on climate change. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davies is at the Welsh Assembly. Andy, have they beaten Westminster to it?
Yes, by about an hour they were debating climate change in the Senate here, and overwhelmingly the Welsh Assembly voted in favour of a motion declaring a climate emergency. And that, according to Plaid Cymru, who tabled the motion, makes this place the first parliament in the world to do so. There were some powerful, passionate speeches heard in the chamber. Here's a flavour of what was said.
The impact of climate change isn't remote, isolated, or far away. It is now, it is immediate, it is near at hand. Solving it too and halting it is also within our grasp.
Let those of us in Wales who genuinely believe we are in a climate emergency work together to forge a new consensus, take the necessary actions to save the planet, and in so doing, save ourselves and our children too.
Now, you got a sense in all of that of the political challenges that are thrown up when you make declarations like this. The Welsh Government itself actually declared a climate emergency on Monday, but they have said that they are going to, what does it actually mean? They're going to talk about their pledges, among others, to create a carbon-neutral public sector by 2030. But already critics are asking for more. And what's going to be really fascinating in all of this is a decision looming for the First Minister here over the M4, whether to plough more than £1 billion of public money into a 14-mile stretch of new M4 motorway to ease congestion around Newport. It's a hugely contentious issue. It's been rumbling on for decades and was repeatedly referenced in the chamber here today. So that decision is going to come in a month. It'll be seen by many as a test case of his climate emergency credentials, and we'll be keeping a close eye on it.
Thanks, Catherine.
But first, even leak subterfuge and public sackings don't come close to what is arguably the most serious threat facing humanity. MPs today debated how to solve the climate change crisis ahead of a key report tomorrow that will call for more ambitious targets. The government's Committee on Climate Change is expected to recommend Britain gets to zero emissions by 2050 and that sales of new petrol and diesel cars be banned by 2030. For some, including the Extinction Rebellion protesters, these goals aren't strong enough. For others, they go too far and risk damaging our economy. To discuss how radical we should be, we're joined by Kate Raworth, author of Donut Economics, the Conservative MP Bin Mafalami, and the former Labour leader Ed Miliband, who's calling for the declaration of a climate emergency. Nice to have you all here. And if I can start with you, Kate, this 2050 ambition to reach net zero emissions, what does that mean to you?
We'll have to see tomorrow when the report comes out, because with these kinds of things, it's all in the detail. Are we talking about domestic emissions in the UK, or are we talking about the emissions that in my clothes and our phones and the lights and everything in the studio that wasn't made in the UK? Are we taking account of flights and shipping? So, and what are the technologies going to be used to deliver this? So we'll have to see when the report comes out. But what really matters is that we had the declaration of an emergency today. I mean, this is the top news story of the day, because this is the only piece of news, to be frank, that our children will remember. And this is the news of the decade, as you said, it's the story of the decade. Today is the day that the UK Parliament recognised that, put it at the top of the political agenda. Now, let's turn that recognition into action. Sometimes it does take disruption to kick off a transformation.
What does that disruption look like to you?
Oh, to me, the disruption has been created by the people of this country, by school strikes, by Extinction Rebellion. It's put it at the top of the agenda.
Sorry,
let's create the transformation.
What does it actually mean? What do you want to see change? What do you really want to see disrupted that will make a difference?
Okay, so if we recognise climate change as an emergency, we don't build a third runway at Heathrow. We don't frack under our lands. We leave fossil fuels in the last century where they belong. We leap like a leader. We want to be leaders, let's lead. We leap like leaders into renewable energy. We restore our soils. We regenerate and reforest and rewild our lands. We bring back British nature. We show the world that we can create a zero carbon economy here with ambition, with speed. That is what I want to see, and I think we absolutely can do it if we follow through with policies that match this target.
Ed, are you going to leap like a leader?
Definitely.
Well, what does that mean?
I think it's quite a big deal today, actually. Look, it was passed without a dissent in Parliament that we're declaring a climate emergency, cross-party. Now we've got to see action, as Kate says. Look, the most important thing I want to see is the action now to follow to insulate our homes, convert them from gas to renewable heat. I mean, that in itself is absolutely massive. To do that over the next 30 years, it's about 1 million homes a year. We're currently doing about 20,000 homes a year.
And is that government that tells us we have to do that?
Well, what I would like to see is a sort of army of people going house by house, street by street. This happened in the 1960s and 70s when we converted to natural gas from coal gas. And we need that, and it's going to need government to make it happen. And you know what I think is important about this? This isn't simply about sacrifice. Yes, there is sacrifice, but this is also how you deliver economic justice, because it's going to be employment for hundreds of thousands of people as we make this transition. And I think politics has a responsibility to try and get that across.
Bim, to get to that economic justice, you probably have to put an absolute stop on a lot of the growth that's happening right now in other areas, like Heathrow, like fracking. Are you prepared to say, yeah, that's the side of history we want to be on?
Well, I think it's about the nature of the growth. So I don't think we need to put a stop to economic growth. I don't think that that's advisable. And actually, what economic growth does is it creates the resources to find the technological, innovative solutions that fix the problems. Because ultimately, we're going to get to where we all want to get to. We're going to achieve our aims.
So we keep growing?
Well, no, we have to, but it's about the way in which we grow. So what do I mean by that? If now in the market, there are all sorts of incentives, whether it be around renewables, whether it be around different types of energy generation, whether it be around electric cars, what the government's role should be is creating that incentive structure to make sure that individuals and families in the free market system as much as possible make those choices that are good for the environment. That's how we can grow our economy without sort of at the same time damaging the environment and moving towards a zero carbon future.
Then? It's just about encouragement.
No, I think we are witnessing a transformation of what we think economic progress looks like. And the 20th century was addicted to this ever-rising line of growth. We invented the idea of GDP. It was this one metric of money, and we became obsessed. And every politician was expected to talk about progress as if it was always GDP growth. We know more now. We know too much. We know that our well-being, as in our bodies, our health lies in balance. In our societies and our planet, well-being lies in balance. We need to bring the planet into balance and distribute incomes far more equitably across the UK.
Growth.
What it means is incomes into the hands of people who don't have it. Right now, growth is concentrating in the hands of a 1%.
The funny thing about this is that Robert Kennedy, the American politician, said 50 years ago that GDP measures everything but that which really matters. And in a way, it's taken us 50 years to recognise. I sort of rather agree with this. I mean, GDP is not a very good measure of the standards of living of the average person,
but you were
of the public goods.
You led a party. Did you talk about growth and GDP?
Oh, yes. No, probably too much. Yeah. Look, and in a way, that's why climate change is the ultimate challenge to politics, because the decisions we make now will have their biggest effects in 20, 30, many generations beyond that. And the reason why I think the economic and social justice part of this is so important is it's a way of showing that tackling this emergency can be central to people's everyday concerns, not just some abstraction. Of course, the threat is important, but also the better life you can build for people is important too.
You had a running leap at this one. Under David Cameron, you had the green oak tree, you had all the talk of, the sort of turning blue, green. That's gone now, hasn't it? I mean, Theresa May was the first one to come out and say school children shouldn't be skipping school for, climate change protests. I wonder if you feel your party is now sitting there awkwardly on the wrong side of revolution.
Right, so there's substantive things and then there's the politics of things. Substantively, this government's done a huge amount of good. I won't list them all, but I'll just come up one statistic that I read earlier. Out of all the G7 countries other than Italy, we've been the fastest to reduce our carbon emissions per head in Britain, compared to all the other G7 countries other than Italy. Now, this government has actually taken lots of good actions. But let me take up the point around economic and social justice, because I think this is a really, really important point, in particular what you were saying about putting sort of income and wealth into the people who don't have it. In the world at the moment, if we look outside Britain, which we're under 2% of emissions in this country, India and China and countries like where my forefathers came from in Nigeria, people want to improve their standard of living. And we are going to have to be partners with them as they do that and make sure that they do that in a way that is environmentally sustainable. What will not work is if here in Britain, Western politicians say, you can't grow your economies because of climate change. So what we need to do is we need to be partners with them and do that. And I think that the way in which we do that will achieve economic and social justice for many billions of people across the world, not just in this country.
So low-income countries are home to people who, as you say, cannot meet their food, water, housing, health needs. Absolutely, they need their incomes to grow, and they will use totally different technologies, as we know, than the ones that we use, because the world can't afford to go fossil fuels. They're going to leap, and they are leaping, and it's fantastic. I'm talking about countries like our own. We're one of the richest countries in the world, and all high-income countries are caught in this extraordinary conundrum. No matter how rich we already are, we always think that the solution to our problems lies always in more growth. We are addicted to endless growth, and that is the existential economic question of our times.
Would you tell people that they can't fly once a year, they can't take their holidays abroad, they can't, you know, use their laptops and their phones?
I don't think it's about saying that. I think there's a really important point here. Look, individuals have to change their behaviour. That is true. And there is an element of sacrifice, but it's got to be fairly shared. But there's a really important point, and it's this. We need system change as much, if not more, than individual change, unless we change the systems by which we operate. Let me give you an example. In Norway, about 60% of new cars sold are electric. In Britain, it's 2%. That's not because Norwegians are necessarily greener by nature than British people, it's because they've got massive incentives to go green. So I think there's a problem here about making people feel powerless. It's all about you sort of doing this for yourself. It's not about you doing it for yourself. It's about government making the big changes and making it possible for people to change.
Thank you all very much. Thanks.
I've been